Hey everybody, Brenton O'Callaghan here from Avantra, and welcome to this Mastering Avantra video. Today I'm going to show you how you integrate ServiceNow with Avantra's SOAP API, allowing you from ServiceNow to trigger actions within your Avantra system. It's really quite simple, and I'm going to take you through it step by step. The first thing I'm going to do is to show you the Avantra system itself. So let's switch over to my screen share. And you can see here I'm logged into my Avantra SAMPIT system. So here I have two systems configured. I have an Avantra master, which is actually the box the Avantra server is running on. And I have another server, which is helpfully called another server. So the scenario we're going to follow here is to create a maintenance window for all systems of the system role test. So within ServiceNow, we're going to say, hey, all test systems are going into a maintenance window between the hours of, let's say, 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. tonight. Now, the first thing to note is that in all Avantra systems, you have the option of having a SOAP service enabled. If you want to know whether your SOAP service is enabled, you can simply go to this URL, /xn/ws/Xandria_webservice.wsdl. If it brings up something like this, your web service is enabled and you're good to go. If it doesn't, you just need to simply switch on the web service. So if I go into administration and into settings, of course I have administrative permissions on this box, and you're going to need that to be able to switch this on. The web service is part of the Avantra UI component. So we'll pop in here and we'll do a search for web service. Now there are only two options in here to do with the web service. The first one is the web service on or off? Now by default, a Avantra installation will not have enabled your web service. So you need to flip this to true. And the second one we're going to need is web service.basic_auth. So this allows an incoming connection to authenticate with your web service using basic authentication. So we'll flip both of those to true. And actually when you enable the web service, you then need to restart your Avantra GUI, not the Avantra master server itself, just the Avantra web GUI, which is known as XAN GUI within your installation. I'm not going to do that here because I've already done that, and there's loads of documentation and knowledge-based documentation on how to do that restart if you're unsure. So once you have these enabled, then you should be able to load your WSDL document, which is part of a standard SOAP service, like this. And if you can see this, you're in pretty good shape. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a user that ServiceNow can use to connect to our Avantra master server. Now I've already done this, but if I go into user management, you can see I have an imaginatively named user called Snow. And all I've done here is just set up the user. In this case, I've given them administrative permissions. In the real world, you're going to want to lock this down so they can only access the data you want them to access, and they can only do the things you want them to do. I've set a password on this user. I know what the password is. And now we'll be able to configure that within our ServiceNow instance. Okay, so what do we have? We have a master server with a few servers installed on that server. We've created a user so that ServiceNow is going to be able to log on to Avantra as themselves and perform actions. And then finally, we've made sure that our web service is enabled. This means that we're good to go to allow ServiceNow to connect to our Avantra master server. One point of note at this stage: if your Avantra master server is behind a firewall, if it's within an internal network and it's not accessible from the internet, you're going to want to have a conversation with your network admins about how ServiceNow is going to connect inwards to Avantra. This is not going to be an unusual conversation. It's probably one you may have already had, especially if you're already using ServiceNow in your environment. But just a point of note, ServiceNow will need to be able to hit this URL to be able to request and to action stuff on your Avantra master. So they may need to go through firewall openings to your server. You may need to put a reverse proxy in place. All of these are outside the scope of this video, but just to point that out, ServiceNow is going to need to make inbound connections to your Avantra master server. So just bear that in mind. Okay, now we're going to switch over to ServiceNow. So here we are. I'm in one of my demo ServiceNow instances, and I've just filtered here on integration because everything we're doing today is part of Integration Hub, which is part of ServiceNow. So we're going to follow a few steps here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to load our WSDL file into ServiceNow so that ServiceNow knows, oh, these are the things that an Avantra server can do. And a WSDL file, and there's plenty of online documentation on and with more information because it's standard across the industry, defines the actions you can perform on an API endpoint. So in this case, it defines to ServiceNow, hey, you can query servers, you can create maintenance windows, you can trigger an automation, you can do loads of things. But in order for ServiceNow to know what they can do, then we need to tell ServiceNow what we can do. So we're going to start here on the left-hand side under WSDL. And if I click in here, I get the option to create a new WSDL. Try saying that 3 times fast. So here I'm going to say Brenton Avantra WSDL, just like this. So I'm going to say accessible from this application scope only, and I'm working in a specific application at the moment within ServiceNow, and there's no authentication on this document. As we saw earlier, we were able to load this document without actually logging in, which means there's no authentication on it, and that's standard within Avantra. So now we're going to be able to define exactly where it's coming from. So here I'm going to take this URL and I'm going to paste it in here, just like this. Okay, so now this is the Avantra WSDL definition document, just like that. So I'm going to submit this, and that's it, all configured. So we now have here Brenton Avantra WSDL. Now if I click in here, don't forget to use the button update. So I hit update and go back in, and in a couple of seconds we should be able to see exactly what actions are available to us within this WSDL. Now it doesn't seem to be loading at the moment. 1 second now. Generate sample SOAP messages. What it's trying to do now at this point is it's trying to call into our Avantra server to get the latest version of the WSDL. There we go. Now that has triggered it to do it. So the first thing I did was hit update. Then I hit generate sample SOAP messages, and bang. As you can see here now, we're getting all of our options available to us within an Avantra server. Everything from create database, check credentials, delete user. Obviously, these are all the actions you could perform on the server, but your permissions should be restricted based on what you should be allowed to do. So for example, really speaking, you're not going to want ServiceNow to be deleting and creating users normally within your Avantra master server. So that's not a permission you would give them, although they have the option to do it. Okay, so now that this is defined, we're good to go for the next step. So we now know how we can call the Avantra server. Now we got to set up a connection to our specific server to be used. So the first thing we're going to define is our credentials. What do we actually use to connect to the box? So we're going to say new credentials. And I'm going to say they're new credentials of the type, I think it's basic authentication credentials. So do you remember earlier when we were enabling the web service within Avantra, we said let's allow basic authentication to this web service. So let's create some basic authentication credentials to go with it. So Brenton Avantra creds. Username is imaginatively Snow. And there's my credentials set. So there we go. Brenton Avantra creds. We're good with our credentials. Now we need to create a connection for those credentials. Let's go into connection. And we're going to create a brand new connection of the type HTTP. So remember, we're doing all of this over web-based APIs. So SOAP all happens over HTTPS. So we're going to create a HTTPS connection. So I'm going to say Brenton Avantra. We're going to look up our credentials that we created a few minutes ago. So let's go in here and say, oh, it's the top one, Brenton Avantra creds. There we go. And our connection alias, we're going to create here as Brenton Avantra server. Just like that. Oh, invalid reference. Let's go and have a look. So we'll create a new alias. So Brenton Avantra server. So what this does is this alias combines your connection and your credentials into one alias that can then be used within applications or in actions or in workflows. So this is exactly what I'm doing here, which is Brenton Avantra server. of type connection credential. Connection type is HTTP. Yeah, and these can all be left as standard. So we hit submit, and there we go. So SNKM portal, Brenton Avantra server, and then our connection URL is going to be this, just like that. Submit. Job done. Okay, so now we first of all created our WSDL, then we created our connection, then our credentials, I should say. Then we created our connection, and while we were doing that, we also created our connection and credential alias, which if we go in here now, we should be able to find if we do a search. There we go, a Brenton and Avantra server. The ID is SNKM portal Brenton Avantra server. We're going to need that a little bit later on. So I'm just going to take that here and put it in my notes over here for us to use later. Okay, now the fun starts. Let's go into, over the left-hand side, under the integration hub, again, we got our action designer. This is where we actually get into the meat of this. This is where we start to define an action to be performed on our Avantra server. And this is pretty much as far as I'll go once I've built my action. I'm not going to put this into a flow or into a subflow. If you want to know how to do that, please see the ServiceNow documentation. They have some great stuff up on their website, and it really is quite easy. I'm just going to get to the point of building the action, and then I'll test it end to end, and then off you go to have fun with the rest of the ServiceNow flow setup. So I'm going to create a new action. So let's go new action. I say Brenton, create maintenance window. Okay. So the category, do you know what? I'm not going to bother with a category, no protection, and I'm just going to have the description to be the same as the name. Okay, now I'm into the the action creation window. So here we have a series of inputs and outputs. So if you think about it as a box, you've got stuff coming in, it does stuff in the box, and things come out the other side. So in terms of inputs, I actually want 3 types of inputs here. So I'm going to start by creating an input of the type system type, just like this. So system type here is, if I go back to my Avantra master, I told you at the start of this scenario that what I want to do is create a maintenance window for the type test or system role test. So that's what I'm doing here in the action designer. I'm saying, hey, listen, I'm going to define that type on the fly. So when we execute this, if the workflow that it's included in requires a maintenance window for all development systems or all production systems, this can be changed on the fly. So this is pretty cool. Okay, I'm going to make that one mandatory. Then I'm going to create another input variable, and this is for our maintenance window timing. So maintenance windows, by best practice, have a start date and an end date. So let's ask for the start date. So I'm going to say from, I'm just call that from, and again I'm going to go string, and you'll see why in a minute. And I'm going to go to. So from and to are the name of our variables. So that's it for inputs. So we have 3 inputs: the system type, so that might be test, production, development, etc. We from, which is the from date and time, and then to, and the to date and time. Now those of you who know ServiceNow might say, Brenton, why don't you just use one of these types in here? For example, there's basic date time, and there's due date, or there's loads of different date types in here. The reason I'm not doing that is because in terms of the SOAP API definition, it requires the timestamp in a very specific format. And for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm not going to go through the whole converting formats to the right format or converting date and times to the right format, because otherwise we'd be here for the next hour, and let's not do that. But I will show you the format that it does need to go in at when we get to that point. So there we go. So we have system type, from, and to. Right, I'm not going to worry about outputs for the moment. You can choose to put that in later on, but for the purposes of what I'm building, when we go through the testing, I don't need to really output much. So the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to query the Avantra server. I'm going to say to Avantra, hey, give me a list of all the systems in the Avantra master server. We do this so that we can get a full list of systems and then filter them based on the system type that we define during runtime. So we'll be able to iterate over the systems and say, right, which ones are of the type test or production or sandpit or whatever the case may be. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to hit this plus button over here, just like this. And now I get asked by ServiceNow, okay, what are you trying to do? Because this is a very powerful tool. You can look up records within ServiceNow, you can create tasks, but I'm going to go straight down to the integrations section and SOAP under integrations. By the way, if any of these features are missing from your ServiceNow installation, don't be worried. Have a chat with your ServiceNow team, because some of the components I'm using here, for example, the whole integration hub component, may not be enabled within your ServiceNow instance. And that's something you have to talk to your ServiceNow team about. Unfortunately, it's not something we at Avantra can help with. So if you're missing something or there's not something on your screen that you're seeing on mine, please have a chat with your ServiceNow team, and I'm sure they'd be more than happy to help. Okay, so we now have a SOAP step. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to select which connection we're going to make. So earlier on, we had the one Brenton Avantra server, which was sn_km_portal.Brenton Avantra server. So that's the one I'm going to select. It here has pre-populated the endpoint to what we said earlier. And now you're going to build what's called a SOAP envelope. Basically, this is the query that is going to be sent to the Avantra server to get data back. So we're going to say, build it from a WSDL, which is, remember, that's SOAP API definition. So I'm going to select Brenton Avantra WSDL. And now we get this really cool full list of all the operations we can perform on the Avantra server. So I'm going to get all servers. Now, what's really cool about what I just did there was I selected the operation get all servers, and ServiceNow has suggested to me, hey, this is typically how the queries are formed for the query get all servers. So this is really cool. And then I have the option of adding advanced headers. Advanced headers become important if you're going through firewalls, for example, that require specific tokens to allow you to get through the firewall, etc., etc. So this is quite powerful as well. For the sake of what we're doing, we don't need it. So I'm going to save right now, and that's one thing you'll learn pretty quickly with ServiceNow. If it's not where you usually spend some time, you need to keep saving stuff, because it's very easy to navigate away and to lose work that you're doing. So after every step, save it just to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. Now, at this point, I'm going to test it. So I'm at the point where I'm pretty comfortable that at least step 1 is ready to go for testing. So this is taking our inputs. This is then querying the Avantra server for the full list of servers that are available. So let's use the test function. Now, the first thing it does is it says, hey, what are your inputs? Now, this would normally be defined by whatever flow this action is built into. But for the case of testing, we can specify these manually. So I'm going to say system type test. And then earlier on, I mentioned that the timestamp is in a very specific format. Here's one I prepared earlier. This is the format that it's in. So I'm going to say it's the 23rd. So 2020, 10/23. So that's 23rd of October. That's today. That's the date I'm recording this. And I want to create a maintenance window from, let's say, 8 o'clock through 9 o'clock, or 8:20 and 15 seconds and 21:20 and 15 seconds. Okay, this may not work, but let's see what happens. We hit run test. Now ServiceNow goes off and does the query to our Avantra server, and then we can view what has happened during that test by clicking here. Okay, no red. This is a good sign. And here under action, you can expand steps, and you get full analysis of what's actually happened in the system. Now, I can tell you straight away, this did not work. Why did it not work? Well, quite simply over here, you can see method failed with code 401, invalid username password combo. Looks like my credentials were wrong. I'm going to pretend that I did that deliberately. So I'm going to come back over here to connections and credentials, which again was part of my integration hub. And I'm going to go into credentials. And I know now that what I defined here in Brenton Avantra creds is probably not right. Okay, let me go and reset this password. So I pop over to my Avantra server, into user management, and I'm going to reset the password here for this user. So we'll open up this user, and I'm going to change password. Just like that. Okay, password is now changed. So let's go back to Flow Designer, and I'm going to go back into where I was testing. I'm going to run the test again because I actually just changed the password, all going well, to what it was before. So let's have a look and see what the output is now. So we expand steps. Okay, still have an invalid username and password. Okay, let's go back and change the password one more time. And we go back in here. Just making sure it's absolutely correct. We'll hit update, just like that. Right, let's see if we can get this to execute now. Okay, we're running the action. Click in here, click into steps, invalid username and password combination. Okay, let's dig a little bit more deeply into this. So HTTP error 401 unauthorized. Okay, so now let's double check the username. Okay, username is SNOW. Like that. Just make sure that this is correct in here. Snow is the user here. Now let's try and log in as the user. Let's make sure that logging in is okay. So Snow, oops. Okay, so I'm able to log in with this user. Okay, not gonna lie, I paused the recording there to figure out what went wrong. Actually, after I had logged in as the user and went back and resaved the credentials within ServiceNow, everything started working. So let's try and run this test one more time. So we hit run test, and after a couple of seconds, we get the opportunity to view the output like this. So now when we expand number of steps, nice thing is that we're getting no error messages. And if we go into this, you can see that we're actually getting information about the systems that are configured. So for example, we've got Avantra master with system ID 9. Let's go in and see if we have that within the server. Okay, Avantra master. And if we click in and scroll down, system ID 9. Great. So let's see if we have another server, which is system ID 11. Let's go back and have a look. Another server, there it is, and system ID 11. Great. So we are now getting the full list of servers extracted to ServiceNow. Okay, right. We've done step one. We've now managed to successfully retrieve information from Avantra. The next thing I'm going to do is actually a script. So, actually, no, sorry, not a script. Script is step 3. The step number 2 is we're going to parse this XML into a little bit more of a nicer object. So we're going to go in and create, so just to show there, what I clicked on here was the plus here to add a new step. And if I scroll down, there is an option for XML parser. So SOAP requests are returned in XML. So we click into XML parser. And now we're in a situation where we can say, based on the data coming out of step 1, the SOAP step, and we're going to take the response body. We then are going to create a structured object that we can use later on with all the information that was passed to us. Now, we could write out here what the expected structure is manually, but let's not do that. I'll show you a little trick. So at this point, run the test again. So we're going to do test system from, here's the one I prepared earlier. This date to this date, run test. In our output, in the test execution output, and yes, of course, the XML parser will have failed because we haven't finished configuring it. You can come in here, and in step 1, you can see that we actually get the output. Actually, no, sorry, that's the input. We get the output from the query here as code. The easiest way of populating what the XML parser should be looking for is simply to copy and paste this example. So we copy that, come in here, and we'll paste it there, like that. Then we hit generate target, boom. And just like that, we now know what the structure we should be expecting out of our queries of the Avantra server should look like. So for example, servers contain IDs, names, timestamps, customer IDs, descriptions, monitoring on or off, operational is in maintenance mode, status, role, etc., including custom attributes as well, which is quite cool. All right, so now we have a query of the Avantra server, we're parsing that query, and we're creating a structured object. That's all because in step 3, I'm going to write a little bit of JavaScript. What I'm going to do in this JavaScript is go through the information that's been provided to us and filter it out based on criteria. So in this case, I'm just doing a very basic filter based on the system type, but you can do so much more. You might want to do it based on, you're looking for a specific system, or you might want to do it on loads of other stuff as well. So here I'm going to say add new step, and I'm going to add a script, executes custom JavaScript. All right. So the first thing we need to do is we need to tell the script what inputs to expect. So the first input we're going to create is as follows. So we're going to create, a second now, I have this, here's one I prepared earlier. So servers list. And here we're going to look for, and that's what this little button here, it tells you some of the variables that are available to you throughout the entire action that you're executing. So here I'm going to look for the XML parser step. I'm going to look for the envelope. I'm going to look, hold on, you're going to look for the XML parser step, in the envelope, the body, and then I'm going to get all servers response. So this is what I'm looking for here. So here, what I've said is the variable servers list, as I defined here, is going to map to the output of step 2, which is the XML parser step, which is the output of the query get all servers response. The second thing I'm going to make available to the script is what we're going to filter on. So the system type. And here I'm going to select from the inputs to the action. So that's what we defined here at the start. And we're going to say system type. We could also say the from and to if we wanted to, but we don't need it. So let's just use system type. Okay, so now we have the servers list as from the Avantra server, and we have the system type, which was provided at runtime to the system. All right. Now I'm going to paste the code I had from earlier, and then I will take you through it line by line. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to let me type it out. All right. So the first thing is, I'm going to say, I'm going to create the loop that allows us to go through the servers list. So it's going to be for var I equals 0, I is less than, and to get at these input variables, they're stored within the variable inputs. Now, if you're not very familiar with JavaScript, I recommend getting a little bit of help from someone who knows a bit more about JavaScript, or use a knowledge base like Stack Overflow or something similar. It's really not that complicated, but there are certain nuances which can be useful to have JavaScript experience for in this scenario. So I'm going to use the variable inputs, and I'm going to access the servers list. You'll see that that name matches what we said up here earlier. So inputs.serverList dot. Now, I know that the output looks like that, and then dot length, and then we'll do I++. For anybody familiar with JavaScript, that is a very standard for loop creation. So what we've said here is the servers list that have been provided to us, there's an array inside, and I call it array _of _servers imaginatively, and then we have dot length. So we're getting how many servers have been provided to us. Now, where did I get this from, you might be wondering. If I pop back in here to the XML parser step, you'll see here, it's defined here. So we took as an input to the script the get all servers response, and inside of that there's an array of servers, and you see it's array.object. That's where I got that name from. So inputs.serverList, which maps to get all servers response, and then we have array of servers inside of that, which is an array of objects. So we get the length of that and we iterate over them in this for loop. Now we want to do a comparison. So we know that inside in a server definition, the role is where we are told whether it's a test system, a production system, a sandpit system, or whatever the case may be. So that's the attribute we want to access. So here, we're going to say if, okay, inputs dot system type, oops, it auto-completed servers list. So system type. So inputs.system type here is what has been provided to the action at runtime, is the equivalent of inputs dot servers list dot array of servers. Now in this case, we're going to access a specific instance of a server. So we're going to use the square bracket notation, and I, which is part of the iteration loop. Anybody who's used JavaScript before, this will not be unusual to you. But what we're saying here for anybody who's not seen this before is that on the array of servers, give me the ith number of ith item in that list. I here being anything between 0 and the length of the list. That's what that for loop has done for us. And then we're going to say dot. Okay, now what do we say next? Let's go back into XML parser setup and have a look. Okay, so we have the array of servers, and then each object is called servers, plural, slightly annoying, but hey, we'll go with it. So for inside the array of servers, we have individual objects, each of which are called servers. Okay, so we're going to go, if I had the mind to do it now, I would change that to server if my OCD had kicked in, but I'm just going to let it be for this one. So .servers.role. Okay, let's just quickly recap what we just wrote there. So if the system type we're looking for matches the system type on the system we're looking for, we're going to do something. Okay, do something here. That's a comment, by the way. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to leave this exactly where it is for right now. And I'm actually going to configure the final step next. And we're going to come back and complete our script afterwards, because it'll make more sense when we've done that. So let's assume that the output of this script is going to be a systems, I'm going to call it systems XML. Okay, it's a string. That's fine, and it is mandatory. So what is going to come out of this script is a list of all of the systems we want to put into our maintenance window. So now we need to send that back to Avantra and say, hey, create a maintenance window, and it's for these systems. Off you go. Okay, guess what? We're going to create another SOAP step. So we're going to hit plus. We're going to go down, and we're going to say SOAP. We're going to do the same thing we did earlier. We're going to select our connection. So we're going to go down and look for the Brenton Avantra server. See that the endpoint is correct. We're going to select our WSDL from Brenton Avantra WSDL. And then the operation is going to be a create maintenance window. Just like that. Now, once again, we get this really powerful suggestion by ServiceNow. Hey, based on what Avantra has told me, these are the things you can include in the API. In the API call, I should say. Now, there you see here, there's a lot marked optional. There's a lot marked, 0 or more, blah, blah, blah. These are just showing you what you could put in, but it's not all of the options available to you. And I want to give you an exact example here. So the maintenance window I'm going to be creating is a one-off maintenance window. It's not a recurring one. In fact, creating a recurring one on the fly like this is probably a little bit more unusual, because recurring tends to be defined in advance. It tends to be recurring. Far more often in a scenario where you're creating a maintenance window, it's ad hoc, it's unusual, it's out of band. So we're creating what we call a one-shot schedule, which is it's going to be executed once and then we're done with it. Because there are these different options within the creation of a maintenance window, it's difficult for ServiceNow to suggest all of these options to you in this box here. So here, for example, it's just saying, hey, you can provide a schedule. Here are the basics of a schedule, but you'll see there's no start time, end time. There's no, there's no real detail here on the scheduling of our maintenance window. I want to show you why that is. So if I go into the WSDL earlier that I showed you, and remember, this defines everything that you can do with the Avantra APIs. If I search for one shot, if I search for schedule, you can go through and you can see over here, there are 9 instances of schedule in here. So you got one shot schedule, a standard schedule, and you'll recognize a standard schedule from what we just saw in ServiceNow. It's got a description, a time zone, does it auto delete? So that's kind of a basic definition of a schedule. But actually there are sub definitions of a schedule, one called a one-shot schedule and one called a recurrent schedule. So if you did want to define a recurrent schedule, you have all these extra options available to you. And for me, for a one-shot schedule, I get the information I'm looking for here. I get the from and the to, which are date-time types. So just to point out here, just something to be aware of, if you're finding you're configuring an Avantra SOAP call, and it's not quite working out for you, it might be complaining it's missing a few feature or a few attributes, or it might be complaining that it's not able to do it. Just make sure you're thinking about all the information you're trying to offer, and you have a read through that WSDL as well, based on what you're trying to do, to make sure you're providing all the information you absolutely will need. Now, in my case, for the sake of ease, and I will provide these sample documents as part of the Avantra knowledge base on support.avantra.com. You can search for ServiceNow integration and you'll find my sample files. So don't be so worried about trying to copy what you see on screen onto your own system. So I'm just going to copy and paste something here that I've already done. I'm going to remove some of these just so I'll recreate these so that you can see what goes where. Okay, so now I've basically copied and pasted a slightly shortened down version of what ServiceNow suggested to us as the various attributes we can provide. But it's quite simple. So I've given my maintenance window a name, MWT001, maintenance window test 001. I've set it to active, so active is true. I've said with monitoring false. So during this maintenance window, no monitoring, please. Turn it all off. And obviously you can fiddle around with these. The next one is, previously we would have seen that ServiceNow actually provided just web schedules and that was it. Here you can see I'm actually saying, but this schedule is of the type one-shot schedule. Now, if I go back in here and I had changed that to recurrent schedule, it would expect all of these different attributes. But for me, with a one-shot schedule, all I'm doing there is I'm saying, hey, you can expect a from and to time when we're defining the schedule. This is all standard SOAP stuff. Okay, so in my one-shot schedule, I've given the schedule a name. So maintenance window test 001, one-shot schedule, OSS. Same for the description. I've given it a time zone. So I've assumed that Central European time zone is what I'm going to be using for this maintenance window. Again, all changeable on the fly. Auto delete when it's finished. Nope, turn that off. And then I have my from and to, which are currently blank. Okay, they're blank. That's not good. Let's fill them in. So here I put web from, I put my cursor right in the middle, and I go over here and I use the drill or the data pill picker. So I hit this, and if you remember at the start, we said you can provide the from and to dates on the fly. So we'll go inputs, from, oops, there it is again. Let's bring it down here. My cursor wasn't in the right place. Inputs, from, and I'll do the same for to, put the cursor there, inputs, to. So what that means is that when it's executing, it will populate this information on the fly, no problem. Now, I'm just going to go back to create means, let's just actually go back here, and here we have create maintenance window request. So let's search for this here. Okay. Cool. So I have my customer ID if I want to with monitoring, schedule, system IDs. Okay. So here all I've done is I've searched for the definition of what a create maintenance window request should look like in the WSDL. It's again, this becomes really second nature when you've done this enough times. And we can see here it expects an element, minimum occurrences of 0. Okay, cool. We can leave it out if we needed to. And here you provide system IDs. So these are, if we go back into our Avantra system, remember we looked at system ID 11 and system ID 9 earlier? These are these system IDs which allow us to uniquely identify a system within the Avantra master server. So we know that a maintenance window has 0 or more system IDs associated with it. Cool. So this means that we can provide system IDs. So how do we do that? So we're going to create the list of system IDs on the fly in our script step, and then simply place them in here once we're done. So all I'm going to do here is you see this blank space I left here? I'm going to put my cursor there and I'm going to say, you know what? The output of script step, which is the systems XML, which should be making more sense now, just put it there. And then finally, you'll see I've set the system type to server. Again, this is sample code. I'll make sure is available once I am finished recording. So we're going to populate the system IDs list on the fly as we go. And everything else can be set as... Now, you can build your maintenance window name all dynamically on the fly based on inputs to this step. I'm just choosing not to in this case. So I think we're pretty good to go on our SOAP step. We don't need to fill in anything else. And I'm going to save again. Just a reminder, always save your work. And now I'm going to go back to the script step. And I'm going to finish our script, which should make a little bit more sense to you now that you know we're passing this into a SOAP API request. And we're going to send it through or we're going to pass in a list of the system IDs, which are just integers, into that request so that it creates a maintenance window for those systems. So at the end of this, I'm going to need to pass something. I'm going to need to pass something into this output parameter we defined here, which we're using in the SOAP request. So I'm going to need to put something in there, that's for sure. Up here, I'm going to create two things. So start equals blank string, and I'll explain what these are in a moment. See, XML end equals blank string. And then var systems XML string equals blank string. What these are, so constants are exactly what they sound like. They're defined once and they can be used multiple times. They can't be changed. And I have two of them. I've an XML start tag and an XML end tag. So anybody who's familiar with XML knows that data is encased within start tags and end tags. So rather than writing them out every single time, I'm going to define them once and use them throughout the code. So I know that an XML tag for a system ID should read something along these lines. So web, and you can see all this in the WSDL, system IDs, like that. So that's the opening tag, just like that. And then we have the closing tag, which looks something like this, which has like that. Again, I'll provide this as part of my sample code. And then finally, I have a variable. And this is the variable I'm going to build up because remember, we're not just dealing with one system. If we're searching for systems based on a criteria that could return multiple systems, we need to take into account those multiple systems. So we now have our start tag and end tag, which we will reuse multiple times. And then we have a variable we're storing the final version of all the conjoined system IDs into. So in here where we said do something here, very simple. We're going to say systems XML string is equal to. So what are we going to do? We're going to say start tag, so XML start, and we're definitely going to have the end tag. So we're definitely going to have the start tag and the end tag, but we also need to put the system ID in the middle. So let's do this. And we know the system ID is going to be something similar to when we looked for the role. Remember, we did a comparison on the role. So actually, if we paste this here, it's the same code, but instead of looking for a role, we're looking for an ID. Very simple. Now, there's an error in my code for the eagle-eyed amongst you. If I did it this way, systems XML string would be reset to the last found server ID every single time. Whereas actually, we want to concatenate all of these server IDs into one longer string. So actually, what I'm missing here is like this. So systems XML string is equal to the current system XML string plus whatever else we have found, just like that. So I'll go through the code one more time before we go ahead and test this, and I'm sure we'll find some bugs and we'll be able to debug it as we go through. Or maybe it'll work first time, who knows. So to start off, we have our XML start tag because we're going to build up a long string of all the system IDs we want to include in our maintenance window. We have an XML end tag. Again, we top and tail each system ID with XML. And then we have a string, just a variable we are concatenating them into, so we keep building this up as we go through. Then for every server that was provided to us by Avantra, we're going to check whether the system role matches what we are looking for. And if it does, we're going to build it using the XML start and end tags, and we're going to add in the system ID and then put it into this ever-growing string of system IDs we want to include. And then finally, we send to outputs.systemXML, as we define down here, our systems XML string, just like that. Now, unfortunately, and it's difficult to do, so this isn't a criticism, it's difficult to debug your JavaScript within ServiceNow when you're building it like this. So it does take a little bit of trial and error. If you're seeing errors, you just got to go through and comment out lines, see what's working, see what's not. It does take a little bit of time, but once you get there, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so I think we're at the point now where I'm going to save, as you always do. So let's recap on where we are. So we defined a set of inputs. The inputs are, hey, we're looking for this system type. We want to create a maintenance window from this date and time to this date and time. So these are the input variables for our action. The next thing we did was, and we tested this part, we go to Avantra and we say, hey, give me a list of all the servers within the system using the method getAllServers. What we next do is we parse the response that comes in, so it's XML as returned by the SOAP API. And from that, we end up with a list of structured servers called array of servers as a result of the get all servers query. We then pass this into our script. So here you can see we've created variables called servers list and system type. And that servers list is mapped to the get all servers response that we saw in the previous step. And system type is mapped to the system type that was defined in the input to the action. Once we do that, we go through the full list of servers. If the role of the server matches what we're looking for, we add that system's ID to a long list of systems ID, each system ID topped and tailed by a bit of XML, so we can just add it into the XML request. And then finally, we're sending a create maintenance window request to Avantra from this time to the time that we defined at the start. And then this should make a lot of sense now. So the output of our script step, the systems_XML variable, we're now just inserting into the middle of the XML to be able to send it back. Look, I'm sure there's far more elegant ways to achieve this that our ServiceNow experts can happily correct me on, but this is a kind of a quick and dirty way of getting this done. But what we now have, and we didn't bother with any outputs because we don't, I mean, in a real world, I'm sure you would bother with outputs and say, hey, it was successful, or no, it wasn't. But in this scenario, we don't necessarily need to worry so much about it. Now, for the sake of clarity and a little bit of hygiene, I'm going to go back and name these steps. So I'm going to say get all servers SOAP request. Then I'm going to say XML parser is fine, absolutely like that. Then we're going to say filter by system type. And then we're going to say create maintenance window. Okay, so now it's just a little bit clearer to us what's happening at each step. So get all the servers SOAP request, we then parse the response, then we filter by system type, and finally we're going to create the maintenance window. Let's go ahead and test it and see where I got it wrong. So our system type is test, and our from, so I'm going to get the sample one I had earlier. So from and to, which are now being used, I'm going to say it's from the 23rd, which is the date I'm recording this on, and I'm going to do it from 8 o'clock until 9 o'clock. So I'm just going to store that for later in case we need to do this multiple times. And just before I run this test, let's go into Avantra and let's have a look at what maintenance windows exist, just to prove I'm not making this up or that this is actually what we want it to be. So let's go into configuration and maintenance windows. And I have no maintenance windows configured with the system at the moment. So let's run this test. So processing the test action is actually pretty quick. And then we're going to be able to go in and look through the logs of what happened at each individual step and see if it worked. Now, the first thing I do when I expand steps is I scroll all the way to the bottom to see if the whole thing worked at all. So let's have a look and do that first. Scroll all the way to the bottom. Oh, it did. How did I know it? How do I know that it did? The first thing I see is that the error code is 0, which means it was successful. Easiest way to see if it was successful is to pop back into Avantra and refresh, and there it is. So maintenance window T001 for system types server. It's next starting today at 2020, and it was modified today at 3 o'clock, which is exactly what time it is now. And if I go in here, you can go in and see, yes, it's active, monitoring's turned off. These are all the things I defined. You can see the schedule, MWT001 OSS from 820. And if I go into the ad hoc custom selection of servers, you can see it took server Avantra master. Okay, is that correct? Let's have a look. So it took the Avantra master. And remember, we were looking for system types test. Avantra master is a system type test. So it worked exactly as it should. Question is now, will it work for multiple servers? Let's do it again. So I'm going to delete that maintenance window, just like that. It's gone. And I'm going to change the type of the server, another server. I'm going to change that to test and hit apply. So now what we have is we have two systems of the type test. Let's go back and run our flow one more time. So close this execution, and we're going to run it exactly the same as it was. We're looking for test systems, run test. This is where it all falls apart, but let's have a look. So once it's finished doing, we'll get our link here to go in and see what happened. We'll go into our steps, go down the bottom. Okay, we got a 0 output again. This is great. And let's go back into Avantra and go into our maintenance windows, refresh, MWT001. Now, in an ideal world, that would increment, but for the test that we're doing, it didn't. And the modified date is 1502, so 2 minutes later. And the difference here, if I go into open, both the Avantra master server and another server have both been added to this maintenance window based on the system type. The final thing I just want to show you here is I've really zoomed through what we can see here in the execution details of our test, but just want to briefly touch on the main points. So for each of the steps that you've executed, you can see step 1, get all service SOAP request. You can click in and see what all the variables are. So for example, you can see the output that came from the Avantra server, and you can go in and remember we used this output to define what the XML parser should be looking for in step 2. But you can go in and see, okay, what headers were sent to the server. You can see what the query was that was sent. And this becomes very powerful. If I scroll to the bottom, you can see here that we actually had a SOAP envelope that looks something like this. So this was the query we were sending to create our maintenance window. So we had placeholders. So for example, we had a placeholder for the from and to time. We had a placeholder for the systems XML. It can be quite nice to see what did that actually end up being when it was sent to the server. You can click on the link over here. So you got your configuration value and your runtime value, and you can click into these and see what was it when it was actually sent. And this is really powerful, especially when you're debugging, for example, your JavaScript code, or debugging whether your variables are working the way they should. So you can see the from date being what we specified at the start. And then in terms of the system IDs that were sent, remember that string we were building up and building up? We ended up with system ID 9 surrounded by the start and end tags, and system ID 11 surrounded by the start and end tags. And that's how we built up, and we included that in the XML, and it was sent. So there we go. What we've done there is we have integrated ServiceNow with an Avantra system. We've logged onto that system. We've retrieved a list of servers that were available. We've built a workflow action, which takes the information from the Avantra server, filters it, and then goes and creates a maintenance window based on the information that it was retrieved from the server. This is a really powerful option if you use ServiceNow within your organization. So happy coding, and I hope that was useful. And thanks very much for watching.